Now for something completely different. Today in the Art Lab I'm going to be creating wind chimes using wood and resin. Instead of the resin being flat with these wood dowels, I'm drilling with a Fosner bit, just a bit of a hole here. That's going to give something for the resin to key into so that it's really strong with this wind chime. To be able to add the resin onto the wood, I went through a few different options. I used just normal clear tape, that didn't work, and in the end I found these folder sleeves at the local stationery shop, and this was the right thickness of plastic to be able to wrap around the wood dowel so that it can hold the resin. My thought here was if I could just sort of tape it to the wood and then wrap it really tightly, that resin shouldn't, in theory, run down the wood. I did have a little bit of seepage just where the resin soaked into the wood itself, but I was very lucky and I didn't actually have any resin escape from this sort of container I've managed to make around the wood. My next challenge was to work out how to get these wood dowels all together without falling over. So my first attempt was to just go around with masking tape, and that was a bit easier said than done. Since that was a bit of a failure, then I moved on to plan B, and that was using a bungee cord to be able to sort of group those together and try to hold them upright so that the resin was flat and it didn't spill. I wanted to make the resin translucent, so what I used here mixing with my casting resin was just a little bit of alcohol ink. So alcohol ink just made the resin clear, just with that colour tint rather than making it a solid colour. For the 30 of you that watched my Temu review on their alcohol inks last week and how they work with resin, then you would have seen I had some pretty good results with them. So I've used those alcohol inks here once again to tint the resin for these wind chimes. I'm going to put a placeholder here, or a place card here, so you can go and watch that video if you haven't seen it already. So even the best of us sometimes can't aim straight, and that's the case here, where unfortunately some of that resin ran over the edge because I wasn't pouring it directly in the centre of this tube that I've created. It's always good to get onto any spillage like this straight away so that it doesn't stain the wood in this case, or go and harden, and then it's a lot harder to get resin off once it's hard. And it's time for the lucky last one to fill up. Now this is casting resin, so it actually took 2 days for it to cure. I gave it a couple of days, and coming up you'll see 2 days later. So as you can see, there's some of the resin has leaked out onto that wood, but overall it wasn't too bad. It's just a matter now of going through each of these and removing the plastic. Not sure about you, but I'm not a huge fan of doing lots and lots of sanding. Unfortunately, I knew I would have to do that with these because you've got the surface tension problem with resin when it dries, and around the edges it always remains higher, and then also the fact that the resin has gone and leaked into the wood a bit, so that layer of resin would have to be sanded off. I also knew that there would be a ridge line where the initial part of the plastic was, because obviously it went up in a lip there, as you can see, and so that bit has to be sanded as well. Alright, time to be aggressive with the sanding. So some of these bits like the lip and the surface tension area needed to get a lot of resin off quickly, so I've just started with a 60 grit. The sanding's kind of broken into 3 phases. First one, I've got my belt sander, which takes off the bulk of any excess resin. The second one is on to the orbital sander, and the orbital sander has, we go up grit, so I'm going to start with 80, 120, 240, 320. And then it's on to hand sanding with the 600 and then 1200 sandpaper. So with both of these I've done a bit of a wet sand. Adding a little bit of water helps lubricate the sandpaper and just makes it a little bit easier. And with the 1200 I actually used a little bit of dishwashing liquid, which then makes it even easier for that sanding process. These finer sandpapers really help to polish up that resin. Right, so I've got these sanded down to 1200. What I'm going to do now is I actually want to stain them, so I'm going to put some masking tape around the edge here so I don't get any stain on the epoxy, and then we're going to stain the sticks. And also went through and added some holes at the end of each of these wind chimes. So I didn't really want to get any stain on the resin, didn't want to have all that hard work go down the drain, so just use a bit of masking tape to go around the edge here just to prevent any staining of the resin from the stain that I'm going to put on the wood. Going to be using an oil based walnut stain to put on these pine dowels, just to give it a bit more depth and colour and maybe bring out some of that grain. So back and watch as we just fast forward through this staining process. Unfortunately, it wasn't until the end of the staining process that I came up with a better method to stain these pine dowels, and that was to put the stain onto the rag that I'm using here to wipe off excess, and that came out a lot more uniform than what using the brush did. The goal with the resin was not to get it completely transparent, but to sort of show off the colour, and probably could have kept on going to 2000, 3000 grit to get a completely see-through resin, but going to 1200 gave me a pretty good result, and then I've just used some automotive polish here to go and polish up that resin. Next up, I needed a way to be able to join all these wood dowels together, and this is where I brought out the inner dad. Years of plaiting my daughter's hair helped me in this regards, as I went through and just plaited the string to give a pretty cool effect. We're nearly near the end of the journey. All the wind chimes are done. We've got them all stringed up. So now it's time to take them outside and see how they'll look. It's not a hugely sunny day, so we don't get that colour reflecting too much through the resin, but I really love how this came out. Keen to know what your thoughts are. Leave them in the comments below. Thanks so much for those of you that have hung around and made it this far into the video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and consider becoming a subscriber if you have not one already.